PK in the universe, and I am back again. And today I want to talk about our memories of old video games. Are we misremembering it? Did the games really look as good as we thought they did? That's what I want to talk about. This is kind of a community conversation, I guess, in the retro gaming community. And I want to talk about how, yes, I think this can be true. Like, we are, in a lot of ways, misremembering it. And there's a lot of reasons why we're misremembering it. So here we go. So first up, I want to talk about, playing games. How did they really look when we played them? It all depends on when you started gaming, too. I think that can play a serious factor. For example, I started gaming in the late 80s, so my first experience was playing on the NES. And I didn't have, RGB NES modded. Obviously it was the RF switch. That's what I grew up with. And man, RF switch looks pretty rough, honestly, compared to like AV or S video. But the leap between AV and S video, it's a mild one, but it's there and it's noticeable to a lot of people. For me, not as much. But I don't, but I still remember it in my mind. I remember it looking so much better than when I look at it playing on RF switch, obviously. And how you play it matters too. Sometimes it can be the total reversal and things look worse than they actually were when you remember. For example, if you're hooking up your, classic video game system like an NES up to your HD TV, yeah, it's not going to look right. Of course not, because one, most people don't mess with the aspect ratio and it's all stretched. Or two, it just looks like it wasn't designed for that kind of TV. So it's because a lot of people aren't using upscalers, which they should be. I mean, I think most hardcore retro gamers definitely are. And I think another factor to consider is the fact that there's just so many people who are playing all these remastered versions, or they're playing it on a more modern system than using an emulator. So we look at it and I'm like, oh man, that doesn't look quite right how I remember. It's because it doesn't, honestly, because maybe it looked either better or worse. And then there's another thing to consider is people are playing remasters more than ever. There's just so many remasters out nowadays. Like, for example, Legend of Mana. Legend of Mana is a very good game. It's a game I really enjoyed on... It's a PS1 game, but I enjoyed it on my PS3 and my PSP. And you could actually play those. You could play a PS3 on your CRT if you wanted to. But I just, it's a game that has its own unique charm. And honestly, but after playing it on the Switch or the PS4, most specifically the PS4, I played it on more than anything. And on the PS4, I played for 30 hours. And that game just looks so much better on the PS4. Like, I can't even think of that game now as the game I played on the PS3, how many years ago, versus how it looks on the PS4 now. That's what's etched in my mind. So when I think of my memories of that game, even though I played probably just about as much time, really, almost as much, I think about the PS4 version now. That's what sticks out in my mind just because of how beautiful and gorgeous it is. Here's the thing, too, and look at something like indie games. There's so many beautiful indie games. And a lot of these indie games are not made with the hardware limitations that a lot of old school games were. Now, some people use specifically the hardware limitations intentionally, yes. But there's also people who are making indie games that are a throwback to that style, but aren't limited by that. So those games look gorgeous. So when we see those beautiful indie games that look like an NES game but aren't an NES game, we think, man, that is how NES games are supposed to look. And do they? Well, sometimes not. I mean, it depends, really, especially the later ones. The later NES games, the developers had really perfected how to make an NES game, look great. And so maybe we have an interpretation of how NES games look based on that experience, too. I think there's a lot of different experiences we as gamers have and how we played them. The setting. Sometimes the setting's not a big difference. Sometimes the difference between AV and RF is a mild one, but maybe the difference between AV and S video is a small one. But, it might be just good enough to us. But sometimes it's a big leap. If you went from RF, obviously, to RGB, that's a huge difference, obviously. That's a pretty big leap. You'll notice a difference right away. I think it all depends on how we grew up playing something, Or, for example, maybe you're somebody who got a hand-me-down console and was late to the party. And this was just, this is just what you knew. and you didn't know anything otherwise. This was the console you had, and you just thought this was amazing. So, maybe you have a different experience based on the generation you're from too. And maybe you went from big leaps and bounds. Maybe you switched over. Maybe you started from one generation, skipped the whole generation, and went to the next generation. So I think your mind also fills in a lot of gaps. I mean, I think as kids, we just have so much more imagination than we did as an adult. So something, just looks absolutely, kind of doesn't look as great. We don't have quite the nostalgia, feeling we did, when we played it. We remember it being better, but the truth be told, our minds just totally fill in those gaps. And also those feelings, our feelings too of that experience in time. For example, I played original Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 2, and I also was watching the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. So a lot of the feelings I have related to those games are also related to that show. I remember watching that show every afternoon on the weekdays. It was a weekday afternoon show. And not only that, then after I was done watching the show, I'd go play the game, honestly. So I have these interconnected in my mind. So maybe in some level, in some way that I feel like it should look a little bit better. And maybe there was a little more, but if I wasn't consistently playing them, I play these games all the time. I have for years. So, but if I had, been away from those games for a really long, long time, I might feel that way. And that would be a totally understandable feeling. So anyways, I just wanted to, talk about this conversation with you guys. I mean, what do you guys think? Are games as good or as bad as we remember? Have you, plugged in an old NES or whatever with the RF switch to see what it looks like? Have you done something like that? Comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay awesome in this universe. Thanks. Bye.